The May sun beat down on the parking lot of Marine Corps Base Camp Pendleton as Catherine Hayes pulled her aging Honda Civic into a visitor's space. She sat for a moment, hands gripping the steering wheel, steadying her breath. Today was the day she'd been waiting for, her son Daniel's graduation from Marine Corps basic training. At 58, Catherine had the look of someone who had weathered life's storms with quiet dignity. Her shoulder-length brown hair, streaked with silver, was pulled back in a practical ponytail. She wore minimal makeup, and her hands showed the wear of years working as a nurse at a VA hospital in Bakersfield. She had raised Daniel alone since her husband died when the boy was just 5 years old. Catherine reached for the windbreaker on the passenger seat, a faded navy blue jacket she'd owned for years. It was comfortable, broken in, and perfect for the cool morning before the California sun reached its peak. She slipped it on without thinking, the familiar weight settling on her shoulders like an old friend. As she walked toward the base entrance, Catherine noticed other families streaming in, dressed in their finest clothes. Women wore bright sundresses and heels. Men sported sport coats despite the heat. She felt a momentary pang of self-consciousness about her simple khaki pants and white blouse, but she pushed it aside. Daniel wouldn't care what she wore. He only cared that she was there. The security checkpoint moved slowly. Catherine waited patiently in line, watching proud parents fumble with IDs and visitor passes. The young Marine at the gate checked her driver's license and handed her a visitor badge. "Welcome to Camp Pendleton, ma'am. The graduation ceremony is at the parade ground. Just follow the signs." "Thank you," Catherine said with a warm smile. She followed the crowd toward a large open area where rows of white folding chairs faced a platform draped in Marine Corps flags. The stands were already filling up. Catherine found a seat near the middle, not too close, but with a clear view of where the new Marines would stand. "Is this seat taken?" a woman's voice asked. Catherine looked up to see a blonde woman in her early 50s, perfectly coiffed, wearing a peach-colored dress that probably cost more than Catherine's monthly car payment. "No, please," Catherine gestured to the empty chair. The woman sat down with a sigh of relief, fanning herself with the program. "I'm Brenda Mitchell. My son Connor is graduating today. This heat is absolutely brutal. I don't know how these boys survive it." "Catherine Hayes. My son Daniel is graduating too, and they survive it because they're tougher than we think." Brenda laughed, a tinkling sound that seemed practiced. "Oh, I suppose so, though I'll be honest, I never thought Connor would actually make it through. He was always such a gentle boy. His father pushed him into this, thought it would make a man out of him." She leaned in conspiratorially. "Between you and me, I think college would have been just as effective and much less traumatic." Catherine said nothing, simply nodded politely. She had learned long ago that some comments didn't require a response. "What about your son?" Brenda continued. "Did he choose this himself, or was he encouraged?" "Daniel wanted to be a Marine since he was 12 years old, Catherine said, and the pride in her voice was unmistakable. "Nothing I said could have talked him out of it, not that I tried." "Oh, one of those military families?" Brenda's tone suggested this explained everything. "Was his father career military?" "My husband died when Daniel was young, but yes, he served." "I'm sorry for your loss," Brenda said automatically, already moving on. "Still, at least your son has that tradition to follow. Connor's doing this for a few years, then he's going into his father's real estate business. This is just resume building, really. Shows discipline and leadership, Before Catherine could respond, the ceremony began. The sound of a drum cadence echoed across the parade ground, and then they appeared, rows of young men and women in crisp dress blue uniforms, marching in perfect formation. Catherine's breath caught in her throat as she spotted Daniel in the third row, standing tall and proud. Tears stung her eyes. Her little boy, who used to cry when he scraped his knee, who she'd raised in their small two-bedroom apartment, who she'd worked double shifts to put through school. He was a Marine now. The ceremony proceeded with speeches from officers about honor, courage, and commitment. Catherine absorbed every word, watching Daniel's face, seeing the transformation that had occurred in these past 13 weeks. When the time came for families to pin the eagle, globe, and anchor emblem on their Marines, Catherine stood with the other parents. She made her way down to the field, her eyes locked on Daniel's face. His composure broke when he saw her, his eyes glistening with emotion. "Mom," he whispered as she approached. "I'm so proud of you," Catherine said, her hands shaking slightly as she pinned the emblem to his uniform. She had practiced this moment in her mind 1,000 times, but the reality was so much more powerful. "I did it, Mom, I really did it." "I never doubted you for a second," Catherine said, pulling him into a brief embrace before stepping back to let him maintain his military bearing. As she returned to her seat, Brenda was whispering to her husband, a portly man in an expensive suit who had arrived late. "That's the woman I was telling you about. Her son is one of those career military types. Probably couldn't get into college." The husband glanced at Catherine, then shrugged. "Different strokes, I guess." Catherine heard but didn't react. She had endured worse than careless comments from strangers. She settled back into her seat, watching the rest of the ceremony with quiet joy. After the formal proceedings ended, families flooded the field to congratulate their new Marines. Catherine hung back slightly, letting the crowd thin. She watched Daniel being congratulated by his fellow Marines, saw him laughing and accepting backslaps, and her heart swelled. "Mrs. Hayes." Catherine turned to find a young Marine officer approaching. He was in his early 30s with captain's bars on his collar and kind eyes that held intelligence and warmth. "Yes. I'm Captain Marcus Rivera. I was one of Daniel's instructors." He extended his hand, and Catherine shook it. "I wanted to tell you what an outstanding Marine your son is. His physical fitness scores were top of his class, but more than that, he showed exceptional leadership qualities. He helped the other recruits, encouraged them when they were struggling. He's going to go far in the Corps." "Thank you, Captain. That means the world to me." "He talks about you all the time," Captain Rivera continued with a smile. "Says you're the strongest person he knows. Says you taught him everything about perseverance and never giving up." Catherine felt her throat tighten with emotion. "He's the one who did the hard work. I just believed in him." Captain Rivera nodded, then his eyes drifted down to Catherine's jacket. She saw his expression change subtly, the smile fading, his eyes narrowing slightly as he focused on something near the jacket's collar. Catherine glanced down, suddenly aware of what he might be seeing. The jacket was old, worn in places, but near the collar, partially hidden by her ponytail, was a small patch. It was faded, barely noticeable unless you knew what to look for, but Captain Rivera clearly knew. His eyes widened. He looked up at Catherine's face, then back down at the patch, then at her face again. "Ma'am," his voice had changed completely, now tinged with something between confusion and awe. "That patch on your jacket, is that what I think it is?" Catherine's hand instinctively moved to her collar, touching the small embroidered seal that she'd forgotten was even there. She had worn this jacket so many times over the years that she'd stopped noticing it. "It's just an old jacket, Captain," she said quietly. "Ma'am, with respect, that's not just any patch. That's a classified unit designation." Captain Rivera's voice dropped lower. "That seal shouldn't exist on any civilian clothing, unless—" He stopped, clearly struggling with what he was seeing versus what protocol demanded. "Unless the person wearing it earned the right to wear it," Catherine finished for him. Captain Rivera stood motionless, his eyes fixed on the small patch near Catherine's collar. Around them, families celebrated, took photos, and laughed with their newly graduated Marines, but the captain seemed frozen in place. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "I need to ask you something, and I apologize if I'm overstepping. But that seal, I've only seen it twice before, both times in classified briefings at officer training school. It represents a program that supposedly doesn't exist." Catherine met his gaze steadily. "Lots of things supposedly don't exist, Captain." "How do you have that patch?" "I earned it," Catherine said simply, "a long time ago." Captain Rivera's mind was clearly racing. "Ma'am, the timeline, you'd have to be, but women weren't officially." He stopped himself, lowering his voice even further. "Mrs. Hayes, were you part of Operation Copper Shield?" The name hung in the air between them. Catherine's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes, a shadow of memory, of things that couldn't be spoken about at a graduation ceremony. "I can neither confirm nor deny participation in any classified operations, Captain. You know that." "But the patch is on a jacket I should have thrown away years ago," Catherine interrupted gently, "and which I forgot I was wearing today. I'd appreciate it if we could drop this subject. This is my son's day." Captain Rivera struggled visibly with what to do. Protocol said one thing, the evidence before his eyes said another. Finally, he came to attention and spoke formally. Ma'am, I understand, but I need to report this to my commanding officer. Not because I think you've done anything wrong, but because, he hesitated, because if you are who I think you are, there are people on this base who will want to meet you. People who need to meet you. Before Catherine could respond, Daniel appeared at her elbow, grinning broadly. Mom, Captain Rivera, I see you've met my mother. I have indeed, the captain said, his tone neutral but his eyes still locked on Catherine. We were just having an interesting conversation. Daniel looked between them, sensing something he didn't quite understand. Is everything okay? Everything's fine, sweetheart, Catherine assured him, squeezing his arm. The captain was just telling me what an excellent Marine you've become. Daniel, Captain Rivera said, your mother and I need to speak with the base commander. Would you mind if I borrowed her for about 20 minutes? The base commander? Daniel's eyes widened. Why, Mom, what's going on? It's nothing to worry about, Catherine said, though uncertainty crept into her voice. She hadn't expected this. She'd just come to watch her son graduate. Please, ma'am, Captain Rivera said quietly. Colonel Anderson needs to see this. He has history with the program. He'll understand. Catherine hesitated, then nodded. All right, 20 minutes, then I want to spend time with my son. Understood, ma'am. Daniel, why don't you wait with your platoon? Your mother will be right back. As Catherine walked across the base with Captain Rivera, she became aware of his careful attention to her, the way he kept glancing at her as if trying to reconcile what he knew with what he saw. A middle-aged woman in khaki pants and a windbreaker, not a warrior from a program that officially never existed. Ma'am, can I ask, what do you do now for work? I'm a nurse at the VA hospital in Bakersfield, Catherine said. Have been for 18 years. You work with veterans? Yes, I understand what they've been through. It helps. Captain Rivera nodded slowly. I bet you do understand, more than they probably realize. They arrived at a building marked Base Command. Captain Rivera held the door open, and they climbed 2 flights of stairs to an outer office where a young corporal sat at a desk. Captain Rivera to see Colonel Anderson. It's urgent. The corporal picked up a phone, spoke briefly, then nodded. The colonel will see you immediately, sir. They were ushered into a spacious office where a man in his late 50s stood looking out the window at the parade ground. He turned as they entered, tall, still fit despite his age, with gray hair cut high and tight and eyes that had seen combat. Captain Rivera, what's so urgent that it couldn't wait until after the graduation ceremonies? Sir, I apologize for the interruption, but I think you need to see this. Captain Rivera gestured to Catherine. Colonel Anderson, this is Mrs. Catherine Hayes. Her son graduated today. Congratulations, Mrs. Hayes, the colonel said politely, clearly confused about why she was in his office. Thank you, Colonel. Sir, Captain Rivera said, Mrs. Hayes is wearing a jacket with a very particular patch, near the collar, if you could take a look. Colonel Anderson approached, his expression curious. Catherine stood still, feeling oddly exposed, as the colonel leaned in to examine the small patch near her collar. She watched his face change, saw the confusion become recognition, saw the recognition become shock. The colonel stepped back, his eyes wide. Where did you get that jacket? It's mine, Colonel, has been for 23 years. That's impossible, that seal, that program. Colonel Anderson's voice trailed off. He walked around his desk, opened a drawer, and pulled out a file. He flipped through it, then looked up at Catherine with an expression of disbelief. Operation Copper Shield was decommissioned in 1994. All personnel files were sealed. The program officially never existed. Women were not allowed in special operations units until... He stopped, his eyes searching Catherine's face. How old are you, ma'am, if you don't mind me asking? 58. Colonel Anderson did the math in his head. His hand went to his forehead. My God, you were there, you were actually there. I was somewhere, Colonel, doing something. But as you said, it officially never happened. Ma'am, please sit down. Colonel Anderson gestured to a chair, his demeanor completely changed. Captain Rivera, close that door and stay. This conversation doesn't leave this room. Catherine sat, her hands folded in her lap, while the 2 officers looked at her with a mixture of awe and confusion. Mrs. Hayes, Colonel Anderson said carefully, I'm going to say some things and I need you to understand that I'm cleared for this information. I was read into the Copper Shield program in 2001 when I was being considered for a Joint Operations Command. What I learned, what they told us in those classified briefings. He shook his head. They said it was the most successful covert personnel extraction program in modern military history, 12 operations over 3 years. 147 American personnel extracted from hostile territories, 0 operational failures, 0 extraction team casualties. Catherine remained silent. They also said, Colonel Anderson continued, that the extraction teams were composed of Marines selected for specific skill sets, language skills, intelligence gathering, combat experience. They said the teams were small, 4 to 6 people, and they said, he paused, clearly struggling with what he was about to say, they said that 2 of the team members were women who had been secretly recruited and trained for special operations work before it was officially sanctioned. Women whose identities were so classified that even now, 23 years after the program ended, their names are redacted from every file. Captain Rivera inhaled sharply. Sir, are you saying? I'm saying that Mrs. Hayes is wearing a jacket with a seal that only 12 people in the entire world were authorized to wear. And if she's wearing it, she's one of those 12. Colonel Anderson leaned forward. Ma'am, I need to know, were you part of the Copper Shield extraction team? Catherine looked at both men for a long moment. Then she reached up and slowly unzipped her windbreaker. Underneath, her white blouse was plain and simple, but she pulled the collar aside slightly, revealing the top of her shoulder. There, faded but still visible, was a tattoo, not large, not decorative, just numbers and letters, CS04, 1990-11994. Copper Shield, 4th Team Member, Colonel Anderson whispered. From 1991 to program termination in 1994. I can neither confirm nor deny, Catherine began. Ma'am, with respect, you don't have to confirm anything. The evidence is right there. Colonel Anderson stood and came to attention. Then slowly, deliberately, he saluted. Catherine, sitting in her civilian clothes, instinctively started to return the salute, then caught herself. But the gesture had been automatic, ingrained from years of service. Colonel, please, she said softly. I'm not active duty. I'm just a mother here to watch her son graduate. Just a mother, Colonel Anderson repeated, lowering his salute. Ma'am, do you have any idea what you accomplished? The people you saved? I know I can't know the details. Hell, I probably don't have clearance for most of it. But the briefings I received. You extracted diplomats from Mogadishu. You got intelligence assets out of Iraq before the Gulf War. You pulled aid workers out of situations that would have caused international incidents if they'd gone public. A lot of people were involved in those operations, Catherine said quietly. I was just one small part. You were one of 12 people in the entire operation, Captain Rivera said, finding his voice. And only 4 of you were actual extraction team members. The others were support, logistics, intelligence. You were one of the people who went in. Catherine stood, pulling her jacket closed. Gentlemen, I appreciate the respect you're showing, but I need to get back to my son. He doesn't know about any of this. I never told him. I never told anyone. Why not? Colonel Anderson asked. Ma'am, you're a genuine American hero. You saved lives. You served your country in ways most people can't even imagine. Why keep it secret? Catherine's eyes grew distant. Because the people we saved deserve to go home and live normal lives without the shadow of what happened to them. Because the operations were classified for good reasons, to protect sources, methods, and the people we worked with overseas. And because, she paused, her voice growing softer, because I wanted my son to have a normal mother. Not someone defined by classified operations and sealed files. Just a mother who loved him and believed in him. Does he know you served at all? Captain Rivera asked. He knows I was in the Marines. He knows I served from 1985 to 1995. But he thinks I was an intelligence analyst working at a desk. Catherine smiled sadly. Which I was for part of my service, the rest. He doesn't need to know about the rest. Colonel Anderson shook his head in wonder. Ma'am, your son just became a Marine. He chose this life. Don't you think he deserves to know that his mother was one of the finest Marines ever to wear the uniform? He knows I'm proud of him. That's what matters. With respect, ma'am, I disagree, Colonel Anderson said firmly. What matters is truth. What matters is honoring the service and sacrifice of those who served in the shadows. What matters is showing young Marines like your son that heroism isn't always loud and public. Sometimes it's quiet, sometimes it's classified, but it's still real. Catherine looked at the colonel for a long moment. "What are you suggesting, Colonel?" "I'm suggesting you let me tell your son who his mother really is." Catherine's hands tightened on the back of the chair in front of her. "Colonel, with respect, that's not your decision to make. It's mine, and I've made it. Daniel doesn't need to know." "Why not?" Colonel Anderson's voice was gentle but persistent. "What are you protecting him from?" "From the weight of it," Catherine said quietly. "From the burden of knowing what his mother did, what she saw. From the questions he'd ask that I can't answer because the operations are still classified. From the nightmares I had for years after I came home. From all of it." Captain Rivera spoke up carefully. "Ma'am, with respect, it sounds like you're protecting yourself, not him." Catherine's eyes flashed with anger for the first time. "Excuse me." "I'm sorry, ma'am, but I've seen this before. Combat veterans who don't want to share what they've been through because they're afraid of being seen differently, afraid of losing the normal life they've built. But your son is a Marine now. He's going to face his own challenges, his own missions. Don't you think knowing that his mother faced similar challenges and came through them would help him?" "You don't understand," Catherine said, her voice strained. "What I did, the places I went, the things I had to do to get people out safely. I've spent 23 years building a life where I don't have to think about those things every day, where I can just be a nurse, a mother, a normal person, if I open that door now." "The door is already open, ma'am," Colonel Anderson said, gesturing to her jacket. "The moment you walked onto this base wearing that seal, the door opened. Captain Rivera saw it. I've seen it. And I guarantee you there are other people on this base who will recognize it." Catherine sank back into the chair, suddenly looking very tired. "I forgot it was even there. I've had this jacket for so many years, it's just part of my wardrobe. I didn't think anyone would notice a faded old patch." "That seal isn't just a patch, ma'am. It's a symbol of something extraordinary." Colonel Anderson sat down across from her. "Look, I understand your desire for privacy. I respect it. But I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to really hear it. There are veterans in the VA hospital where you work, aren't there? Veterans who have been through combat, who have seen things they can't talk about." "Of course." "And when they talk to you, when they open up about their experiences, do you think it helps them to know they're talking to someone who understands? Someone who's been there?" Catherine was quiet for a moment. "Yes, when they learn I served, it changes the conversation. They trust me more, they feel less alone." "Exactly," Colonel Anderson said. "Your son is going to face challenges in his Marine Corps career. He's going to see things, do things that he can't talk about with most people. Wouldn't it help him to know that his mother understands, that she's been there?" Before Catherine could answer, there was a sharp knock on the door. The corporal from the outer office stepped in, looking apologetic. "Sir, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's a situation developing. Private Sullivan is demanding to see his mother. He's quite insistent." Catherine stood immediately. "Daniel, I need to go." "Wait," Colonel Anderson said. "Let me handle this. Corporal, please escort Private Sullivan in here." "Sir, he's getting quite loud. He thinks something's happened to his mother." "Then we'd better not keep him waiting." A moment later, Daniel burst into the office, his face flushed with worry and anger. "Mom, what's going on? Why did Captain Rivera bring you here? Are you in some kind of trouble?" "I'm fine, sweetheart," Catherine said, moving toward him. "Everything's fine." "Then why are you in the base commander's office? Why won't anyone tell me what's happening?" Daniel's eyes moved between his mother and the two officers. "Did I do something wrong? Is this about me?" "No, son," Colonel Anderson said. "You've done nothing wrong. In fact, you should be very proud. You graduated with honors today. Captain Rivera tells me you were one of the top recruits in your class." "Then what is this about?" Catherine looked at her son's face, so young, so earnest, so worried, and felt something shift inside her. He wasn't a child anymore. He was a Marine. He had chosen this life with full knowledge of what it could mean. Maybe the colonel was right. Maybe he deserved to know the truth. "Daniel," she said softly, "sit down. There's something I need to tell you." "You're scaring me, Mom." "Don't be scared. I'm not sick. I'm not in trouble. It's just, I haven't been completely honest with you about my time in the Marines." Daniel sat slowly, his eyes never leaving his mother's face. "What do you mean?" Catherine took a deep breath. "You know I served from 1985 to 1995. You know I worked in intelligence. That's all true, but it's not the whole truth." She pulled off her windbreaker and handed it to Daniel. "Look at the collar. There's a small patch there." Daniel examined the jacket, finding the faded seal. Okay, what is it? It's the insignia of a classified program called Operation Copper Shield. I was part of that program from 1991 to 1994. What kind of program? Catherine glanced at Colonel Anderson, who nodded. I can tell you the broad strokes, but not the specific operations. The program was designed to extract American personnel from hostile territories. Diplomats, intelligence assets, aid workers, people who found themselves in danger in places where we couldn't send conventional military forces without causing international incidents. Daniel's eyes widened. You mean like special operations? Similar but different. Smaller teams, more focused on extraction than combat, though. Catherine paused. Combat was sometimes unavoidable. But women weren't allowed in special operations back then, Daniel said, confusion clear on his face. Officially, no, but this program was so classified that normal rules didn't apply. They needed people with specific skills. I spoke 4 languages fluently. I had intelligence training, and I was small, which made it easier to blend in certain environments. 4 languages? Daniel looked at his mother as if seeing her for the first time. I didn't know you spoke 4 languages. You never asked, Catherine said with a slight smile. And I didn't advertise it. I speak Arabic, Farsi, Somali, and Spanish. I learned them in the military. Captain Rivera stepped forward. Daniel, your mother was part of a 4-person extraction team that successfully completed 12 missions over 3 years. 147 American lives saved. 0 mission failures. Daniel's mouth opened, then closed. He looked down at the jacket in his hands, then at his mother, then back at the jacket. Why didn't you tell me? Because it was classified. Because I wanted you to have a normal childhood. Because, Catherine's voice caught, because I didn't want you to see me as anything other than your mother. But this is incredible, Daniel said, his voice rising with excitement and confusion. You're a hero. You saved all those people. Why would you hide that? Because heroes are supposed to be larger than life, and I'm just a regular person who did her job, Catherine said firmly. I didn't want you growing up with some unrealistic image of who I was. I wanted you to know me as I am, a nurse who works long hours, who worries about paying bills, who burned dinner more times than I can count while you were growing up. That's the real me. Colonel Anderson cleared his throat. Mrs. Hayes, with your permission, I'd like to share something with your son. He opened a drawer in his desk and pulled out a thin file. This is a declassified summary of Operation Copper Shield. It doesn't contain mission details or locations, but it does outline the scope of the program. He opened the file and began reading. Personnel extracted included 12 diplomatic staff from situations involving hostage-taking or imminent capture, 17 intelligence assets from compromised positions in hostile nations, 34 aid workers from conflict zones, and 41 other American citizens in life-threatening situations. Total missions, 12. Team members injured during operations, 3 non-life-threatening injuries. Team members killed, 0. Hostages lost during extraction, 0. Daniel stared at his mother. You did all that? I was part of a team that did all that, Catherine corrected. I wasn't alone. Who else was on your team? I can't tell you that. Their identities are still classified, but I can tell you they were the bravest, most skilled people I've ever known. 2 of them are still serving in various capacities. The team leader retired 5 years ago. And me, I came home, went to nursing school, and focused on raising you. Why nursing? Because I'd seen enough death and violence. I wanted to spend the rest of my life helping people heal instead of fighting. Catherine reached out and took her son's hand. And because I wanted a career that would let me be there for you, I wanted to come to your school plays and baseball games. I wanted to be a normal mom. Daniel's eyes were filled with tears. You were a normal mom, you were the best mom, but you were also this incredible person who saved all those people, and I never knew. Now you know, Catherine said softly, and I need you to understand something. This doesn't change who I am. I'm still the same person who taught you to ride a bike and helped you with your homework. The only difference is now you know there was a period in my life when I did something extraordinary. Something extraordinary? Daniel's voice cracked. Mom, you saved 147 people. That's not just extraordinary, that's... I don't even have words for what that is. Captain Rivera spoke up. Daniel, your mother is being modest. The briefing I received about Copper Shield said the extraction team members were selected from the top 1% of Marine Corps personnel. They underwent additional training that made SEAL training look easy. They operated in countries we weren't officially in, under conditions that would terrify most soldiers. And they did it all while officially not existing. "I still don't understand why you kept this secret," Daniel said, looking at his mother. "Why you never told me." Catherine was quiet for a long moment. Then she pulled the collar of her blouse aside to show the tattoo on her shoulder. "Do you see these letters and numbers? CS-04. That was my designation, the fourth member of the Copper Shield team. I got this tattoo when the program ended so I would never forget who I'd been, what I'd done. But I also promised myself that I would never let it define me. I would never let it overshadow the rest of my life." She let her blouse fall back into place. "You joined the Marines because you wanted to serve your country, because you wanted to be part of something bigger than yourself, not because your mother had been some kind of secret operative. I wanted your choices to be yours, not shadows of mine." Daniel stood and pulled his mother into a fierce embrace. "You gave me something better than stories of secret missions, Mom. You gave me an example of strength, sacrifice, and service. Whether I knew the details or not, I knew you were strong. I knew you'd been through something that shaped you, and that example is what made me want to be a Marine." Catherine held her son, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so proud of you, Daniel, so incredibly proud." "I'm proud of you too, Mom." Daniel pulled back, wiping his eyes. "But I have one question." "What's that?" "Can you teach me Arabic?" Despite everything, Catherine laughed. "Why would you want to learn Arabic?" "Because I want to understand the world you operated in, because I want to be as prepared as you were. Because," Daniel hesitated, then smiled, "because my mom speaks 4 languages and I only speak 1, and that's kind of embarrassing." Colonel Anderson chuckled. "Son, I like the way you think." As the emotional moment settled, Colonel Anderson returned to his desk and pulled out another file. "Mrs. Hayes, there's something else you should know, something I think will interest you." Catherine wiped her eyes and composed herself. "What is it, Colonel?" "When I was read into the Copper Shield program in 2001, I was also given a list of the people your team extracted. Obviously, I wasn't given mission details, but I was given names. Do you know what happened to those people after you brought them home?" "I never followed up," Catherine said quietly. "The program emphasized separation. Once we extracted someone, they went back to their lives and we went back to ours. We weren't supposed to maintain contact." "Well, I did some research over the years. I was curious." Colonel Anderson opened the file. "Of the 147 people your team extracted, 12 went on to become ambassadors or high-ranking State Department officials. 23 continued intelligence work, several at the highest levels. 18 became senior military officers. And the rest, the aid workers, the civilians, they went back to their lives. They got married, had children, built careers. Because of you, there are now over 300 direct descendants of the people you saved. Children and grandchildren who exist because you brought their parents and grandparents home." Catherine's hand went to her mouth. 300. 317 to be exact, as of last year when I updated my research. Colonel Anderson looked at her with profound respect. "Ma'am, you didn't just save 147 lives, you saved generations." Daniel looked at his mother with awe. "Mom, do you understand what that means?" "I understand that we did our job," Catherine said, but her voice was shaking. "We brought people home, that's what we were supposed to do." "It's more than that," Captain Rivera said. "It's legacy, it's impact that ripples out across decades. Those 317 people include doctors, teachers, scientists, military members, and countless others who are making a difference in the world, all because of what you did." There was a knock at the door, and the corporal stepped in again. "Sir, I apologize, but there are several senior officers requesting to see you. They heard there's a Copper Shield team member on base. They're asking permission to pay their respects." Colonel Anderson looked at Catherine. "Ma'am, the decision is yours. But I should tell you that at least 2 of the officers outside served in operations that were directly supported by intelligence your team gathered. They've wanted to thank a Copper Shield member for years, but never thought they'd get the chance." Catherine looked overwhelmed. "Colonel, I don't think—" "Mom," Daniel interrupted gently, "these people want to thank you. Let them, please." Catherine took a deep breath, then nodded. "All right, but just for a few minutes. Then I really do need to spend time with Daniel. That's why I came here." Colonel Anderson opened the door and spoke to someone outside. A moment later, 3 officers entered the room. One was a brigadier general, his uniform heavy with ribbons and medals. The other two were lieutenant colonels, both looking to be in their 50s. The general approached Catherine first. "Ma'am, I'm General Robert Klein. In 1992, I was a captain leading a reconnaissance mission in Somalia. We were given intelligence about safe routes and hostile positions that allowed us to complete our mission without casualties. That intelligence came from a copper shield operation conducted 2 weeks prior. I've wanted to say thank you for 29 years. He extended his hand, and Catherine shook it, speechless. One of the lieutenant colonels stepped forward next. "Ma'am, Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Chen. In 1993, my father was working as a State Department liaison in Iraq. He was caught behind enemy lines when his cover was blown. A 4-person team extracted him from Baghdad in an operation that officially never happened. He came home, and 6 months later I was born. I became a Marine because of the example of the people who saved my father's life. I never thought I'd get to meet one of them." Catherine's eyes widened. "Your father, was his name William Chen?" "Yes, ma'am, you remember him." "I remember everyone," Catherine said softly. "He was injured when we found him. Broken ribs, concussion, but he never complained, never slowed us down during the extraction. He was brave." Lieutenant Colonel Chen's eyes filled with tears. "He died 3 years ago, ma'am, cancer. But he lived long enough to walk me down the aisle at my wedding and to meet his grandchildren. He told me about the extraction exactly once when I joined the Marines. He said the team that saved him was the most professional, skilled group of warriors he'd ever seen. He said one of them was a woman who spoke perfect Arabic and convinced the guards at a checkpoint that they were journalists. Was that you?" Catherine nodded slowly. "Yes, I convinced them we were a news crew covering the humanitarian crisis. It bought us enough time to get through the checkpoint and out of the city. He said that woman saved all their lives that day. He said she was fearless." Lieutenant Colonel Chen came to attention and saluted. "On behalf of my father and my family, thank you, ma'am. Thank you for giving me a father, and thank you for the example of service you've set." Catherine returned the salute, her composure finally cracking completely. Tears streamed down her face as she lowered her hand. The third officer, the other lieutenant colonel, stepped forward. "Ma'am, I'm Lieutenant Colonel James Morrison. I don't have a personal connection to anyone you extracted, but I studied the Copper Shield program at the War College. I wrote my master's thesis on unconventional extraction methods, and your program was the gold standard. Everything we do now in personnel recovery owes a debt to the techniques and protocols your team developed. You revolutionized the field." Daniel watched his mother receive these honors, saw her struggling to accept the recognition, and finally understood why she had kept her past secret. This wasn't about modesty or fear. It was about the weight of responsibility, the burden of knowing that lives had depended on her decisions, and the quiet strength it took to carry that burden without seeking recognition. Colonel Anderson spoke up. "Gentlemen, I think Mrs. Hayes needs some time with her son, if you could give them some privacy." "Actually," Catherine said, her voice stronger now, "I'd like to say something first." The room fell silent. "When I joined the Copper Shield program, I was 29 years old. I was a staff sergeant with language skills and intelligence training, but I'd never been in real combat. I was terrified during that first mission. I thought I'd make a mistake, get someone killed, fail the team, but my team leader told me something I've never forgotten. He said, 'We don't do this for glory or recognition. We do it because someone has to, and we're the ones who can. Years from now, the people we save won't remember our faces or our names, but they'll live their lives because of what we do today. That's enough.'" She paused, looking at each of the officers in turn. "I've lived by those words for 23 years. I never sought recognition because I didn't need it. I knew the people we saved went home, and that was enough. But standing here today, hearing about William Chen's daughter, learning about the 317 descendants, meeting people whose missions succeeded because of our work, I realized that my team leader was wrong about one thing. It's not enough. It's more than enough. It's everything." Catherine turned to Daniel. "That's what I want you to understand about service. It's not about medals or recognition or people knowing your name. It's about doing what's right when it matters, even if no one ever knows. It's about the quiet satisfaction of knowing you made a difference, even if that difference isn't visible for years or decades." "I understand, Mom," Daniel said, "and I promise to live up to that example." General Klein stepped forward one more time. "Mrs. Hayes, I know you value your privacy and will respect that, but I wonder if you'd allow us to do one thing. The Marine Corps has a wall of honor at the museum in Quantico. It recognizes Marines who served with exceptional distinction in classified operations. We can't use your name or provide details of your missions, but we could add a small plaque that simply says, "In honor of the members of Operation Copper Shield, who served in silence and saved lives in the shadows." Would that be acceptable? Catherine considered this. Would the other team members be consulted? Yes, ma'am, we'd reach out to all surviving members. Nothing would be added without unanimous consent. Then I'll agree, provided they agree. But Colonel, one condition, the plaque should emphasize that we were a team, no individual recognition. We succeeded because we worked together, trusted each other, and put the mission above everything else. That's what should be remembered. Understood, ma'am. It will be done exactly as you wish. As the officers filed out of the room, each one stopping to shake Catherine's hand and thank her again, Daniel stood beside his mother with visible pride. When they were finally alone except for Colonel Anderson and Captain Rivera, Daniel spoke up. "Mom, can I ask you something?" "Of course, sweetheart." "You said you got that tattoo so you'd never forget, but you've spent 23 years trying not to talk about it, not to think about it. Doesn't that contradict each other?" Catherine smiled sadly. "No, it doesn't. The tattoo reminds me of who I was and what I'm capable of, but choosing not to talk about it constantly reminds me that I'm more than my past. I'm a mother, a nurse, a friend, a person who lives in the present. The key is balance, remembering without being consumed by memory, honoring the past without being imprisoned by it." "Do you still have nightmares?" Daniel asked quietly. Catherine hesitated, then nodded. "Sometimes, less than I used to, but yes, some missions still haunt me. The close calls, the people we couldn't save in time, the moments when everything hung by a thread, those memories don't fade completely." "The people you couldn't save? I thought your record was perfect, 0 losses." "0 losses during extractions," Catherine corrected. "But there were people we were sent to save who died before we could reach them. There were missions we planned that got scrubbed at the last minute because the situation changed. Those failures, even though they weren't our fault, still weigh on you." Colonel Anderson interjected gently. "Ma'am, that's the burden every combat veteran carries. The ones you couldn't save hurt more than the ones you did, even though the ones you did save far outnumber the others." "I know," Catherine said, "and working at the VA hospital helps. When I can help a veteran cope with their trauma, find some peace, it feels like I'm balancing the scales a little bit." Captain Rivera, who had been quietly observing, spoke up. "Mrs. Hayes, can I ask what made you volunteer for the Copper Shield program? You were already serving honorably as an intelligence analyst. You had a safe job. Why risk your life in the field?" Catherine was quiet for a moment, remembering. "It was 1991. I'd been in the Marines for 6 years, working at a desk, analyzing intelligence reports. I was good at my job, but I felt like I was capable of more. Then one day, my commanding officer called me in and asked if I'd be interested in a special assignment. He couldn't tell me what it was, only that it would be dangerous, that I could never talk about it, and that I might not come home." "And you said yes?" Daniel asked. "Not right away. I asked for 24 hours to think about it. I spent that entire night thinking about why I'd joined the Marines in the first place. I'd joined because I wanted to serve, to make a difference, to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. Working at a desk, I was supporting that mission, but I wasn't directly fulfilling it. So I said yes." "Weren't you scared?" Daniel pressed. "Terrified," Catherine admitted. "The training was brutal, physical conditioning beyond anything I'd experienced. Combat tactics, survival skills, advanced language immersion, escape and evasion techniques. There were times I wanted to quit, to go back to my safe desk job. But I kept pushing because I knew that if I could make it through the training, I could actually save lives." "Tell me about your first mission," Daniel said, "if you can." Catherine glanced at Colonel Anderson, who nodded. "You can share general details, ma'am, just not specific locations, names, or classified methods." "My first mission was an extraction of 3 aid workers who had been taken hostage," Catherine began. "We had intelligence about where they were being held, but the compound was in the middle of a city, surrounded by hostile forces. We couldn't go in with a large team or use air support without starting an international incident." "So what did you do?" Daniel was completely absorbed. "We went in as journalists. I posed as a translator for a European news crew, the other team members. We had fake press credentials, camera equipment, everything. We talked our way into the compound by saying we wanted to interview the group holding the hostages to hear their side of the story. They let you in. Eventually, it took hours of negotiation at the gate, but my team leader was incredibly persuasive, and I backed up everything he said in the local language. Once inside, we used a combination of deception and timing. When the guards were distracted during evening prayers, we accessed the room where the hostages were being held, convinced them we were there to help, and got them out through a pre-planned escape route. Just like that, Daniel sounded skeptical. Nothing is ever just like that in the field, Catherine said with a slight smile. There were complications. One of the hostages was injured and couldn't walk quickly. We had to carry her part of the way. We were almost discovered twice. At one point, I had to convince a suspicious guard that the noise he heard was just the wind. But we made it to the extraction point and got everyone out safely. Were you armed? Always, we had concealed weapons, but the goal was never to use them. Every shot fired increased the risk of mission failure. Our job was to get in quietly, get the hostages out quietly, and disappear before anyone realized what had happened. Captain Rivera leaned forward. Ma'am, that level of operational discipline is extraordinary. Most special operations forces are trained for direct action, go in hard and fast. What you're describing is something much more subtle. Because our missions were different, Catherine explained. We weren't there to eliminate threats or destroy targets. We were there to save lives and get out without causing an incident that could have diplomatic repercussions. That required a different mindset, different skills. And you did that 12 times? Daniel shook his head in amazement. 12 successful missions over 3 years. But we planned and trained for probably 50 missions that never happened, either because the situation resolved itself, or because the risk was deemed too high, or because the intelligence changed. The actual extractions were just the tip of the iceberg. Colonel Anderson checked his watch. Mrs. Hayes, I don't want to cut this short, but the graduation celebration will be winding down soon. Your son's fellow Marines will be looking for him. Daniel jumped up. Oh man, I completely forgot. My whole platoon is meeting for dinner at the base. Mom, you have to come. I want you to meet everyone. Catherine smiled. I'd love to, sweetheart, but do me a favor. Let's keep this conversation between us for now. Today is about you and your fellow Marines graduating, not about ancient history. Ancient history? Daniel laughed. Mom, this is the coolest thing I've ever heard. You're like a real-life spy. How am I supposed to not talk about this? The same way I didn't talk about it for 23 years, Catherine said firmly. With discipline and respect for what classified means, you're a Marine now. You understand operational security. Daniel sobered. You're right, I'm sorry, I just got excited. I know and I love you for it, but this stays between us. Understood. As they prepared to leave Colonel Anderson's office, the colonel stopped them. Mrs. Hayes, one more thing. You mentioned you work at the VA hospital in Bakersfield. I have contacts at the VA. If you ever need anything, additional resources for your patients, support for programs, anything at all, please don't hesitate to reach out. It's the least we can do for someone who's given so much. That's very kind, Colonel. I'll keep that in mind. And Daniel, Colonel Anderson turned to the young Marine, your mother set an impossibly high bar for service and sacrifice. But don't let that intimidate you. Let it inspire you. Be the Marine she trained you to be, honorable, disciplined, and dedicated to something bigger than yourself. Yes, sir, I will, sir. As Catherine and Daniel walked out of the building and back toward the parade ground, Daniel slipped his arm through his mother's. I still can't believe it. My mom, the secret operative. Former secret operative, Catherine corrected with a smile. Very former. Now I'm just a nurse who happens to have some interesting stories I can't tell anyone. Except me, you told me. I told you because you earned the right to know. You became a Marine. You made the same commitment I made. That makes you part of the Brotherhood now. They walked in comfortable silence for a moment, then Daniel spoke again. Mom, do you have any regrets about the program, about the missions, about any of it? Catherine thought about this carefully. I regret the people we couldn't save. I regret the nights I spent away from you when you were little, even though I told myself I was serving something bigger. I regret that your father never got to see you become a Marine. He would have been so proud. But do you regret doing it, being part of Copper Shield? No, Catherine said firmly. I don't regret it. I did something that mattered. I made a real difference. And everything I learned, everything I experienced made me a better nurse, a better mother, and a better person. The hard things we go through don't diminish us, Daniel. They forge us into something stronger. As they rejoined the celebration on the parade ground, several of Daniel's fellow Marines called out to him. Catherine hung back, watching her son laugh and joke with his new brothers and sisters in arms. She saw in them the same youth, the same eager determination, the same courage that she had carried all those years ago. Captain Rivera appeared at her elbow. "He's going to be a fine Marine, ma'am." "I know he is. And for what it's worth, you did the right thing telling him the truth. He needed to know where he comes from, what kind of strength runs in his family." Catherine smiled. "Captain, can I tell you something? Something I learned a long time ago." "Of course, ma'am." "The strongest thing I ever did wasn't extracting hostages or evading enemy forces or any of the dramatic things that make good stories. The strongest thing I ever did was coming home after the program ended and building a normal life. Raising my son alone, working night shifts at the hospital, showing up every day for the quiet, unglamorous work of being a good person and a good parent. That took more strength than any mission ever did." Captain Rivera looked at her with deep respect. "Ma'am, I think that might be the most important thing anyone's ever told me about service. Thank you." As the sun began to set over Camp Pendleton, casting long shadows across the parade ground, Catherine Hayes stood watching her son celebrate with his fellow Marines. She thought about the long, winding road that had brought her to this moment, from a young Marine eager to prove herself, to a covert operative working in the shadows, to a nurse and mother building a quiet life of service. She reached up and touched the collar of her windbreaker, feeling the small patch that had inadvertently revealed her past. Maybe it wasn't an accident that she'd worn it today. Maybe some part of her had wanted Daniel to know, had wanted him to understand that strength and courage came in many forms, and that the greatest warriors were often the ones who served in silence. Tomorrow she would drive back to Bakersfield, back to her job at the VA hospital, back to her small house and her quiet life. But today she stood in the fatting sunlight and let herself remember, not with pain or regret, but with quiet pride, the Marine she had been, the lives she had saved, and the legacy she had passed on to her son. And that, she thought, was enough. It was more than enough, it was everything.